Ricky Martin was born Enrique Martín Morales on the night of December 24th, 1971, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, a date full of symbolism. While many families celebrated Christmas, a child was born who, decades later, will be recognized on nearly every continent. From the start, his story seemed marked by contrasts: light and shadow, exposure and silence, applause and solitude. The son of parents who separated early, Ricky grew up in an emotionally fragmented environment. He moved between houses, routines, and differing expectations, learning from a very young age how to adapt. This experience deeply shaped his personality. It made him observant, sensitive, and extremely aware of other people's emotions. While other children expressed their feelings openly, Ricky learned to feel in silence. His mother was organized, practical, and protective. His father, more introspective, gave him an analytical view of the world. This familial duality reflected in Ricky himself, at once artistic and disciplined, emotional and strategic. From an early age, he seemed to carry more questions than answers within him. Even as a very young child, Ricky showed an unusual connection to music. He sang before he even understood the meaning of the words. He didn't sing just for fun. He sang with intensity, as if trying to communicate something he couldn't explain. Family members and teachers quickly noticed that this child was different. It wasn't just talent, it was presence. Gradually, he began participating in commercials, something relatively common in Puerto Rico, but extremely rare for someone so young to maintain consistency and stand out. In front of the cameras, Ricky didn't seem nervous. On the contrary, he seemed at home. He looked at the lens naturally, followed instructions precisely, and displayed emotional maturity rare for his age. However, this early exposure came at a cost. Ricky grew up faster than he should have. While other children played freely, he learned about schedules, expectations, performance, and approval. He learned early that being loved often came conditioned on performance. This planted in him a constant need to please, a trait that would follow him for many years. At school, Ricky was described as reserved, polite, and introspective. He wasn't the center of attention among peers, but he was admired for his sensitivity. He observed more than he spoke. He listened more than he asserted himself. This attitude didn't stem from extreme shyness, but from a rich and, at the same time, confusing inner world. During childhood, Ricky began to feel different, even without fully understanding why. There were emotions he couldn't name, feelings he didn't see reflected in the other boys around him. Instead of confronting these sensations, he learned to hide them. Music became his silent refuge, the place where he could exist without explanation. The first signs that this boy had an extraordinary destiny were not only in his vocal talent. They were in his ability to feel deeply, to transform emotion into expression even without words. When he sang, Ricky seemed more complete. When he was away from music, he seemed incomplete. In the eyes of adults, he was a promising child. In Ricky's eyes, he was simply someone trying to understand his place in the world. This tension between what others saw and what he felt became a central theme of his life. Nothing in that childhood was overtly tragic, and perhaps that made it even more complex. There wasn't a single obvious traumatic event, but rather a silent accumulation of expectations, inner confusion, and premature maturity. Ricky wasn't forced to grow up. He learned to grow up early. When, still a preteen, the opportunity to join Menudo arose, many saw it as a stroke of luck. But in truth, it was just the natural next step for someone who had already lived under emotional spotlights since childhood. Ricky didn't join Menudo by chance. He had been shaped from an early age for that world, even without knowing if he truly wanted it. Ricky Martin's childhood was not just the beginning of a career. It was the beginning of a silent internal struggle between who he was, who the world wanted him to be, and who he hadn't yet had the courage to become. When Ricky Martin joined Menudo at the age of 12, his life changed abruptly and irreversibly. To the outside world, it was the beginning of a dream. International fame, constant travel, deafening applause, and millions of teenage fans spread across Latin America, the United States, and Europe. For Ricky, however, that moment also marked the start of one of the most psychologically complex and emotionally demanding periods of his life. Menudo was not just a boy band. It was an entertainment industrial machine, highly profitable, strictly controlled, and designed to turn children into global products. Every detail was calculated: appearance, behavior, interviews, clothing, stage gestures, and even the way they spoke. The members had to embody a perfect, youthful ideal, constantly cheerful, healthy, heteronormative, and emotionally accessible to the audience. From the very first day, Ricky realized that his life no longer fully belonged to him. Menudo's contracts were known for their rigidity. The young artist had little or no control over basic decisions, schedules, meals, rest, studies, and even personal relationships. The routine was exhausting: endless rehearsals, almost daily concerts, back-to-back interviews, and constant travel between countries, often without time to process what was happening. For a child in the midst of emotional development, this level of pressure had profound consequences. Ricky lived in a constant state of surveillance, always observed, always evaluated, always compared to the other members of the group. Any mistake could mean loss of prominence or replacement. In Menudo, no one was irreplaceable. Upon reaching a certain age, members were automatically removed and replaced by younger ones. This created a permanent climate of fear: fear of aging, fear of change, fear of not meeting expectations. During this period, Ricky began to face silent internal conflicts. Adolescence is, in itself, a time of discovery, insecurity, and identity formation. In his case, this process happened under the spotlight, without privacy and with unrealistic demands. There was also pressure to embody a specific model of masculinity. Menudo sold a carefully constructed image of perfect boys, romantic, desirable, but never too complex or questioning. There was no room for doubt, vulnerability, or emotional authenticity. Ricky already felt that parts of himself did not fit into that mold. However, expressing this was unthinkable. Silence became a survival strategy. He learned to hide his feelings, control his emotions, and smile even when he was confused or emotionally exhausted. Years later, Ricky would describe this phase as a period of emotional ambiguity, gratitude for the opportunity, but also pain for the invisible losses: childhood, spontaneity, and the freedom to be who he truly was. Despite his tremendous success, life inside Menudo was marked by deep loneliness. Surrounded by people, fans, and bandmates, Ricky felt emotionally isolated. There was no room for honest conversations or structured psychological support. The focus was always on the next show, the next country, the next profit. Fame came too early, before Ricky had the emotional tools to handle it. He became known worldwide before he truly knew himself. This disconnect between his public image and inner world created a fracture that would follow him for many years. When Ricky left Menudo, there was no party or emotional farewell. For the industry, it was just another natural replacement. For him, it was like leaving a closed universe without a map to the real world. Suddenly, the phone stopped ringing. The spotlights went out. Fame vanished as quickly as it had arrived. Ricky faced something few can understand: the silence after early stardom. This transition was brutal. He was no longer the boy from Menudo, but he was not yet the solo artist the world would come to know. He felt insecurity, fear, and deep doubts about his future. However, it was precisely this emptiness that allowed the beginning of his true reconstruction. After leaving the group Menudo, Ricky Martin entered one of the most complex periods of his life, a phase that combined a fall from fame, personal uncertainty, and the need to rediscover himself. His journey at this point was not only professional, it was deeply human and psychological, full of internal conflicts that would shape the artist and the man he would become. Ricky had lived fame intensely since the age of 12, but this early fame brought with it an emotional dependence. External validation became part of his identity. When he left Menudo, he faced a reality he had never experienced before, not being the center of attention. Suddenly, the applause disappeared, the camera flashes vanished, and the world moved on without him. This period was marked by feelings of abandonment, insecurity, and a constant sense that he needed to prove his worth outside the mold Menudo had built for him. For Ricky, it was not just his career at stake, it was his very identity. Who was Ricky without the fame that had defined him since childhood? Life away from the spotlight brought with it deep loneliness. Ricky moved to the United States, into a foreign environment, far from his family and childhood friends. He had no consistent support network, and the weight of the responsibility to rebuild a career on his own was overwhelming. Beyond physical loneliness, there was emotional loneliness. He could not speak openly about who he was, about the parts of his identity he still kept hidden. This intimate secret generated anxiety and fear. He knew that revealing his sexual orientation could ruin job opportunities, and this awareness of constant risk turned freedom into a luxury impossible to attain at that time. In the first years after leaving Menudo, Ricky tried to establish himself as an actor and solo singer, but encountered severe barriers. Theater productions, Mexican soap operas, and small roles in the United States often rejected him, sometimes because he was Latino or simply because he did not fit the market's desired standard. Each rejection was a blow to his self-esteem, a reminder that the path would be long and difficult. However, this phase of failures and attempts was also where he began to build resilience. He realized he needed to redesign his career, not merely replicating what he had done before, but creating something authentic, aligned with his true identity. It was through music that Ricky found the key to rebuilding his own identity. He began exploring different styles, more personal lyrics, and sounds that combined his Latin roots with an international ambition. This process was not immediate. It involved experimentation, mistakes, internal and external criticism. Ricky needed to balance what the audience expected with who he truly was. Each rehearsal, each recording, and each performance became an exercise in self-discovery. Gradually, he stopped being just Ricky Martin from Menudo and began to become Ricky Martin. Loneliness, failures, and reinvention taught Ricky lessons that would be decisive for the rest of his life. When he finally released the album Vuelve, Ricky Martin was not just releasing music. He was showing the world a more complete version of himself, ready to conquer new horizons with courage and maturity. After years of silent struggle, rejection, and personal reconstruction, Ricky Martin entered one of the most decisive periods of his career. His comeback was not just a return to the music charts. It was a complete reinvention of his artistic and personal identity, a strategic move that would transform not only his career, but also the way the world viewed Latin music. The album Vuelve became a milestone that marked the beginning of this new phase. Released in 1998, it brought hits that helped establish Ricky as a mature and versatile artist capable of moving both Spanish-speaking fans and international audiences. The fusion of Latin rhythms with modern pop production marked the start of his path toward global fame. Vuelve is the fourth studio album by Ricky Martin, released by Sony Music Latin and Colombia in 1998 and produced by KC Porter with co-production from Roby Draco Rosa and Desmond Child. It debuted at #1 on both the Billboard Top Latin Albums and Billboard Latin Pop Albums charts, and reached #40 on the Billboard 200, a notable achievement for a primarily Spanish-language record at that time. The real turning point came with the release of Livin la Vida Loca an explosive single that dominated the charts worldwide. But the impact of this song went beyond music. The track sparked the so-called Latin explosion in the United States, opening doors for other Latin artists such as Shakira, Enrique Iglesias, and Jennifer Lopez. Ricky's music video and live performances showcased not only musical talent, but also a global star image, combining sensuality, dance, and charisma. The single sold millions of copies, boosting endorsement deals and increasing Ricky's market value as both an artist and public figure. This success did not happen by chance. Ricky worked meticulously on building his personal brand, aligning music, style, choreography, and image into an irresistible package for international audiences. Every visual choice, every gesture on stage, every interview was part of a strategic plan to become a globally recognizable figure. While Ricky shone on stage and appeared on the covers of international magazines, his personal life was marked by deep internal conflicts. The pressure to maintain a perfect and charismatic image was enormous. He felt a constant need to hide his true identity, fearing that revealing his personal secrets could destroy the career he had built with so much effort. Fame brought comfort and luxury, but also loneliness. Between tours, rehearsals, and press obligations, Ricky began to realize that worldwide success did not eliminate the need for authenticity and emotional balance. For much of his career, Ricky felt he needed to hide a fundamental part of his identity. He knew that revealing his sexual orientation could have serious consequences. Million-dollar contracts could be canceled, work opportunities could disappear, and the carefully built fan base could turn critical or hostile. This secret became a constant burden, affecting not only his career, but also his emotional health. Even in moments of success, Ricky reported a feeling of emotional disconnection, as if he were living a double life. The world only saw the pop idol everyone wanted him to be, but the real Ricky, with his doubts, fears, and desires, remained invisible. This kind of pressure can be compared to living in a golden cage, where everything is luxurious and desired, but the freedom to be authentic does not exist. Maintaining personal relationships was another challenge. Ricky needed to protect his privacy and his image, which made it difficult to form deep or loving bonds. Every friendship or romantic relationship had to be carefully filtered because any misstep could be exploited by the media or fans. He faced constant dilemmas. How much to show? How much to hide? His love life, in particular, was the target of endless speculation. The artist had to learn to navigate between discreet relationships and constant exposure, and the fear of public judgment meant many intimate connections were brief or conditional. This need for external control created emotional isolation, even while surrounded by millions of fans. Beyond the silence about his sexuality, Ricky also carried the responsibility of being a global Latin icon. Every move he made was scrutinized under the microscope of the media and music industry. He could not make mistakes. He could not falter in the image he projected. The pressure to represent not only himself, but also the Latin community added an extra layer of responsibility. The secret he carried was therefore doubly heavy, personal and cultural. The constant fear of losing respect or support led Ricky to develop emotional survival strategies. He became cautious, meticulous, and almost paranoid about public exposure. Interviews were rehearsed, public appearances carefully planned, and even his clothing and gestures were part of a carefully constructed narrative to maintain the desired image. Living while hiding his true identity had profound consequences for Ricky's mental health. He felt anxiety, fear of rejection, and a constant sense of inadequacy. In later interviews, he described carrying a silent pain, a feeling of not fully belonging to himself. This constant tension between being who he was and being who the world expected him to be caused emotional, where that only began to ease when he decided to break the silence. Ricky Martin's fame became a golden prison, comfortable, admired, full of opportunities, but without personal freedom. He could access international stages, luxurious properties, and passionate fans, but he could not live authentically without fear of losing everything. This situation created a paradox. The more success he had, the more trapped he felt by the need to maintain his image. Ricky compared the experience to a constant theater, where he performed every day as the version of himself the world wanted to see, not the version he truly was. This theater was exhausting, lonely, and emotionally draining. The loneliness of the pop icon was not visible on magazine covers, but it was deep and real. Ricky Martin's life took a definitive turn in 2010 when he decided to reveal to the world something he had kept hidden for decades: his sexual orientation. Until that moment, Ricky's personal life had been carefully kept private. Between interviews and public appearances, he was known as the charismatic Latin star, always smiling, always confident, but behind the cameras there was a man carrying fear, anxiety, and a secret that in the industry's perception could ruin his career. Coming out publicly was not an impulsive act. Ricky spent years struggling internally, weighing every consequence. He knew that revealing his truth could alienate fans, jeopardize million-dollar contracts, and put decades of hard work at risk. However, the decision was not only strategic, it was a matter of emotional survival. He needed to reconcile with his own self, accept himself fully, and live authentically. When he finally announced to the world that he was gay, the response was surprising. Support from fans, industry colleagues, and family exceeded any fears he had. The reaction showed that authenticity generates true connection, and that, at its core, fame is not about a perfect image but about shared truth. The revelation was more than news for the world. It was personal liberation. Ricky described in interviews how he felt a huge weight lifted from his shoulders, a sense of peace he had never experienced before. He could finally look at himself in the mirror without lies, without masks, without the constant fear of judgment. This freedom also impacted his emotional and mental health. Ricky began to live with less anxiety, less tension, and more capacity to connect genuinely with the people around him. Personal relationships became deeper, based on honesty rather than appearances. Shocked by Ricky Martin's untold personal story? Want to follow every detail of his journey of courage, reinvention, and global fame? Like, comment, and subscribe now. Don't miss the next episode. Discover how Ricky built his fortune, luxurious lifestyle, and a legacy that changed Latin pop forever.